It was late in the evening, and the sky was already turning dark. The small town streets were quiet, and most people were heading home to their families. A man was driving back from work, tired and worn out after another long day at the repair shop. He was a single father, and even though life was not easy, he never complained. Every day, he worked hard, fixing cars and doing odd jobs, just to make sure he could pay the bills and keep food on the table. On this particular evening, he noticed something unusual as he drove down a quiet road. A small car was pulled over to the side. The headlights were still on, and standing next to the car was a young teenage girl. She looked upset, her shoulders shaking, and even from a distance, he could see she was crying. He slowed down his truck, pulled over, and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl quickly wiped her face, embarrassed that someone had caught her crying. She shook her head. I don't know what to do. My tire is flat, and I don't even know how to change it," she said, her voice trembling. The man parked his truck behind her car and stepped out. He could see the panic in her eyes. She was maybe 16 or 17, and it was clear she had no idea how to handle the situation. "Don't worry," he said softly. "It happens to everyone. Let me take a look." The girl sniffled and nodded, stepping aside. Her car had a completely flat tire, and she hadn't even managed to get the spare out. He could tell this was the first time she'd ever dealt with anything like this. He smiled kindly, trying to calm her nerves. "You're safe now. I'll help you change it. No need to cry." She took a deep breath, still clearly shaken. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I didn't know who to call, and I thought I'd be stuck here all night." He nodded. "I understand, but you're not alone anymore." He went to the trunk of her car, asked her if she had a spare tire, and she pointed it out. With years of experience, he quickly pulled out the tools and got to work. His hands were rough and steady, moving with ease. He had changed hundreds of tires in his life, but this time it felt different. He wasn't just fixing a car. He was helping someone who truly needed it. The girl watched him quietly, her tears slowly drying. She kept glancing at him, almost surprised that a stranger would stop to help. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." He paused for a moment, looked up at her, and said, "Because one day, my daughter might be in the same situation. I'd want someone to help her too." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he arrived, she gave a small smile. Those words touched her more than he realized. Within minutes, he had the flat tire off and the spare secured. He tightened the bolts carefully, making sure it was safe for her to drive again. Once everything was done, he stood up, wiped his hands on an old rag he kept in his truck, and said, "There you go. Good as new. At least good enough to get you home." The girl let out a breath of relief. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done without you." He waved it off, as if it was nothing. "Don't mention it. Just drive safe and get the tire replaced soon." She reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and said, "Please, let me pay you something." He shook his head immediately. "No, keep your money. I didn't stop for that. Just promise me you'll be more careful, and maybe learn how to change a tire. It's a good skill to know." Her face turned red with embarrassment, but she nodded. "I will. I promise." For a moment, they stood there in silence. She was still holding back tears, but now they weren't out of fear. They were out of relief. "Thank you again," she said softly. "Really, you're the only person who stopped." He gave her a small smile. Sometimes the world feels lonely, but there are still people willing to help. Remember that. The girl got back into her car, and before driving off, she rolled down the window and waved. He watched as her car disappeared down the road, then climbed back into his old truck. As he drove home, he couldn't help but think about the moment. He thought about his own daughter, who lived with his ex-wife in another town. He missed her terribly and often wished he could see her more. Tonight reminded him of her, reminded him that no matter how hard life was, kindness still mattered. He pulled into a small driveway, parked his truck, and went inside his modest home. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. He heated up some leftover food, sat at the small kitchen table, and stared at the plate. His body was tired, but his heart felt lighter. Helping that young girl didn't fix his financial struggles or the loneliness of being a single parent, but it reminded him of something important. The little things we do for others can make a big difference. That night, before he went to bed, he whispered a silent hope that his daughter, wherever she was, would always have someone kind to turn to if she ever got into trouble. He didn't know it yet, but the kindness he showed that night would come back to him in an unexpected way. A phone call the next morning would change everything. The next morning came quietly. The man woke up early, as he always did, even though his body was heavy from the long hours he put in at the shop. His small alarm clock buzzed faintly on the bedside table, and for a moment he just lay there staring at the ceiling. Life wasn't easy, but he never let it crush him. He had responsibilities, and work was waiting. After a quick shower, he poured himself a simple breakfast, just coffee and some toast. His house was quiet, too quiet. Sometimes the silence weighed on him, especially in the mornings. He remembered how, years ago, mornings had been filled with the sound of his little girl's laughter when she used to live under the same roof. Those memories always pulled at his heart, but they also gave him strength to keep going. He packed his old tool bag and drove to the repair shop. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon with soft colors. He unlocked the garage doors and breathed in the familiar smell of oil, rubber, and metal. For most people it might smell harsh, but for him, it smelled like survival. This shop kept his life moving forward. He started the day with the usual routine, checking messages, organizing parts, and preparing for whatever repairs would come through the door. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. But as he wiped his hands on a rag, the phone sitting on the counter began to ring. He picked it up, his voice steady. "Good morning, repair shop. How can I help you?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a woman's voice came through. It was firm, but not unkind. "Hello. I believe you're the man who helped my daughter last night. She came home very emotional and told me everything." He was caught off guard. He hadn't expected to hear anything more about last night. "Oh," he said, clearing his throat. "Yes, I stopped to help her. She had a flat tire, and she seemed pretty shaken up." The woman let out a quiet sigh, almost of relief. "Yes, she was very upset when she called me, but she couldn't stop talking about how kind you were to her. She told me you didn't take any money, that you just helped and told her to be safe." He shifted on his feet, feeling a little uncomfortable with the praise. It wasn't a big deal. Anyone would have done the same. But the woman's tone grew more serious. "That's just it. Not everyone would have. Many people passed her by, but you didn't. I want to thank you for what you did. You probably don't realize how much it means to me." He rubbed the back of his neck, not sure what to say. I thought of my own daughter. If she was ever stranded, I'd hope someone would stop for her. That's all." The woman went quiet for a moment, and he wondered if he'd said too much. Then she spoke again, her voice softer now. "That's very human of you. My daughter told me you were gentle with her, that you didn't make her feel stupid or small. Do you know how rare that is these days?" He let out a small chuckle. "Well, I've made plenty of mistakes myself. I know what it feels like to need help and not know what to do." There was another pause before the woman continued. "I'd like to come by and thank you in person. Where is your shop located?" He hesitated. He didn't usually like visitors, especially people he didn't know. But her voice carried sincerity, and he could tell she wasn't just saying it out of politeness. She truly wanted to show her gratitude. Finally, he gave her the address and said she was welcome to stop by if she wanted. After hanging up, he leaned against the counter, staring at the phone for a while. It was strange how a small act of kindness the night before was now turning into something bigger. He hadn't expected thanks, and certainly not a follow-up call. As the morning went on, he tried to focus on his work, replacing brake pads for an old pickup, checking fluids for another car. But his mind kept wandering back to that conversation. Who was this woman? She sounded well-spoken, polished, maybe even wealthy. The girl had mentioned being worried about her mother, but hadn't said much else. He didn't care about who she was or how much money she had. To him, helping the girl was just the right thing to do. Still, something about the way her mother spoke stayed with him. There was a mixture of strength and vulnerability in her voice, as if she was used to controlling situations but felt touched by this small act she couldn't control. Later that afternoon, the bell above the shop door rang, and in walked a well-dressed woman. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself with confidence. But there was also a softness in her eyes as she approached him. "Are you the man who helped my daughter?" she asked. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on his rag again. "Yes, that was me." She extended her hand. "Thank you. Truly. My daughter came home shaken, but what stood out most was how safe you made her feel." She kept saying, "He didn't just fix the tire, Mom. He cared." He shook her hand, a little awkwardly. "I'm glad she got home safe. That's all that matters." The woman smiled faintly. "You don't understand. People like you are rare. Most would have ignored her, maybe even taken advantage of her. But you didn't." She paused, studying him closely. "I'd like to do something for you, if you'll let me." He shook his head firmly. "No need. I don't do favors for rewards. I just wanted to help." Her eyes softened. "That may be true. But sometimes kindness deserves recognition. You may not want anything, but perhaps you need something." He frowned, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to anyone offering him help. Usually, he was the one fixing everyone else's problems. But now, for the first time in a long time, someone was looking at him with gratitude, not expectation. The woman didn't push. She simply gave him her card, placed it on the counter, and said, "If you ever need anything, call me. Even if you think it's small. Please." With that, she turned and left the shop, leaving him standing there staring at the card. The name on it meant nothing to him yet, but he would soon learn she was not just any mother. She was a woman with power, influence, and more resources than he could ever imagine. He slipped the card into his pocket, shaking his head. Life had a strange way of working. Last night, he had just been doing what felt right. But now, something much bigger seemed to be unfolding. And deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. That evening, after the woman had left the shop, the man sat quietly on his worn-out chair in the corner of the garage. The card she had given him was still in his pocket. He hadn't taken it out yet, but he could feel its edges pressing against the fabric of his jeans, as if it was reminding him of something important. He thought back to the girl from a night before. The way her voice had trembled when she told him she didn't know what to do. The relief in her eyes when he said she wasn't alone. And most of all, the small smile she had given him after he told her about his own daughter. That smile had stayed with him. The next few days went on as usual. He repaired cars, greeted customers, and swept the floors of the shop when business was slow. Life didn't change overnight, and he didn't expect it to. But then, 3 days after the incident, he heard the sound of a car pulling into the shop driveway. When he looked up, he recognized it immediately. It was the same small car with the spare tire he had put on. The door opened, and out stepped the teenage girl. She looked much calmer this time, no tears on her face, though she still carried a touch of nervousness in her posture. She smiled shyly when she saw him. "Hi," she said, almost timidly. I wanted to come by and say thank you again." He set down the wrench he was holding and gave her a kind nod. "You're welcome. How's the tire holding up?" She laughed lightly, a sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Well, that's kind of why I'm here. My mom told me I need to get a proper replacement, not just ride around on the spare. She wanted me to bring the car back here, to you." He chuckled. "Smart woman. A spare is only meant for emergencies. You'll need a real one if you plan to drive safely." She followed him as he walked over to her car, and for a few moments, there was silence between them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You know, I was really scared that night. I've never felt so helpless. But the way you talked to me, it made me feel like it was going to be okay." He glanced at her, his expression warm. "That's what people need sometimes, just someone to remind them it'll be okay. You were brave, even if you didn't feel like it." She looked down at her shoes, blushing slightly. "Most people would have just driven by. I kept thinking nobody cared. But then you stopped. I'll never forget that." Her words struck him deeply. He wasn't used to people saying things like that. Most of his life, he had worked quietly in the background, unnoticed. But here was someone telling him that his small act of kindness had meant the world to her. As he replaced the tire with a new one, they talked more. She told him about school, about how stressful it was trying to keep up with everything. She admitted she often felt like her mother didn't understand how overwhelming life could feel at her age. He listened patiently, offering bits of advice here and there, but mostly just letting her speak. When the job was done, he stood up, brushing off his hands. All set. This one should last you a good while, as long as you take care of it. She smiled, brighter this time. Thank you. Again. I don't know why you're so kind to me, but I'm glad you are. He gave a small shrug. Kindness doesn't cost anything. And besides, you remind me of my daughter. She's a little younger than you, but I'd want someone to treat her kindly if she ever needed help. The girl hesitated, then asked softly, Do you get to see her often? The question caught him off guard. He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. Not as often as I'd like. She lives with her mother in another town, but I think about her every day. The girl nodded slowly, as if she understood more than her age suggested. She's lucky to have a dad who cares so much. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he simply smiled faintly and handed her the car keys. She thanked him once more and promised to drive safely. That evening, after she had left, he sat in the shop again, thinking about the conversation. Something about it stirred emotions he hadn't felt in a long time. The connection was simple, but it was real. She was just a teenager who had been scared and vulnerable, and he had stepped in at the right time. But now, it felt like their paths had crossed for a reason. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was her mother. My daughter told me she went back to see you, the woman said. Her tone was lighter than before, almost playful. She seems to trust you. That doesn't happen easily with her. He wasn't sure how to respond, so he just said, She's a good kid. She'll be fine. The woman chuckled. You sound like you've known her longer than a few days. Maybe that's a good thing. She needs people like you around, people who make her feel safe. He felt a strange warmth at those words. It wasn't about pride. It was about the reminder that what he did mattered. For so long, his life had been about survival, about getting through each day. But now, through a simple act of kindness, he had found himself connected to a family he hadn't expected to know. That night, he lay awake in bed, thinking about everything. He didn't know what was going to come from all this, but he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the smallest decisions, like pulling over to help a stranger, can open doors you never imagined. And though he didn't realize it yet, this door was just beginning to open. That night, after closing the shop, the man drove home in silence. The hum of the engine filled the air, but his thoughts were louder. He kept thinking about the girl's shy smile, about how her voice trembled less this time when she spoke, and about her mother's words on the phone. He pulled into his small driveway and sat in the truck for a while before going inside. The house was dim and quiet, as always. He dropped his keys on the counter, opened the fridge, and stared at a nearly empty shelf, milk, a few eggs, and some leftovers from the night before. He poured himself a glass of water instead of cooking, then sat at the kitchen table. His eyes wandered to an old photo frame propped against the wall. It was a picture of him and his daughter when she was little. She had been laughing in the photo, her cheeks round, her small hand wrapped around his. He picked up the frame and traced his finger over the glass. He whispered softly, I hope someone is kind to you, too. It had been years since he had separated from his daughter's mother. The details didn't matter much anymore. What mattered was that his daughter didn't live with him. He visited when he could, but the visits were short and always left him with an ache in his chest. She was growing up without him seeing the day-to-day moments. That was what hurt most. Helping the teenage girl on the road had stirred those feelings again. She wasn't his daughter, but for a moment, she had looked at him with the same kind of trust a child gives a parent. That trust had stayed with him, warming a part of his heart that had felt cold for too long. The next day at work, he found himself distracted. He kept glancing at the door, half expecting the girl or her mother to show up again. He scolded himself silently. They had no reason to come back. He had done his part, and that should have been the end of it. But life had a way of surprising him. Late in the afternoon, the phone rang once again. He answered, and this time it was the mother. Her voice was calm, but there was a certain strength behind it. "Hello. I hope I'm not bothering you," she said. "Not at all," he replied, though he was caught off guard again. "I just wanted to check if my daughter's car is fine now. She said you replaced the tire." "Yes, it's all good. She'll be safe driving it now." There was a pause before she continued. "She seems happier these last few days. She's been talking more, smiling more. You may not realize it, but you've made a difference." He frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. "I just did what anyone should do." The woman's voice softened. "That's the thing. Most people wouldn't have. You don't give yourself enough credit." Her words stayed with him long after the call ended. He didn't see himself as someone special. He was just a mechanic, a man doing his best to survive. But hearing someone say he made a difference, it struck something deep inside. That evening, as he closed the shop, he walked slowly down the street before heading to his truck. The town was quiet, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. He thought about how small his life felt compared to others, yet how this small life had intersected with someone else's in such an unexpected way. When he reached home, he sat on the porch for the first time in weeks. The wooden steps creaked under his weight as he leaned back and watched the stars come out. He remembered when his daughter used to sit beside him, asking him to name the constellations even though he only knew a few. He chuckled quietly at the memory, then sighed. Inside the house, he pulled out the business card the woman had given him. He hadn't looked at it properly before. Her name was printed in elegant letters, and below it was the name of a company he recognized. It was a big one, the kind of company that made headlines in newspapers. No wonder she had sounded so polished on the phone. He set the card back down, shaking his head. Their worlds were so different. She lived in a world of wealth, influence, and power. He lived in a world of grease-stained rags, late-night worries about bills, and quiet dinners alone. The only reason their lives had crossed was a flat tire. But even so, he couldn't ignore the feeling that it mattered. The next few days were slow at the shop, giving him too much time to think. He caught himself remembering the girl's nervous laugh, the way she said she'd never forget his kindness. He wondered if she really meant it or if it was just something people say in the moment. On the fourth evening, when he was about to close the garage doors, he saw a familiar car pull into the driveway again. It was her, the girl. She got out, carrying a small box in her hands. She walked up to him with a smile that looked more confident this time. I wanted to give you this," she said, handing him the box. "It's just cookies. I made them with my mom. We thought you might like them." He blinked in surprise, taking the box slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said quickly, almost nervously. "But we wanted to. You helped me, and I don't want to forget it. My mom said it's important to show gratitude." He opened the box, and the smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air. Something so simple, yet it meant so much. He smiled warmly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." She hesitated, then asked, Do you ever miss your daughter?" His chest tightened at the question. He nodded slowly. "Every day." The girl's eyes softened. "I think she's lucky, you know, to have a dad who cares so much. Even if you don't see her every day, she knows." Her words hit him harder than she probably realized. He felt his throat tighten, but he managed a small smile. "I hope so." As she left that evening, he stood at the doorway, holding the box of cookies. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone. And though he didn't fully understand it yet, something was changing in his life. The kindness he had given freely was slowly coming back to him, piece by piece, in ways he never expected. The days rolled on, but something felt different now. The man still woke up early, drank his plain coffee, and headed to the shop. But there was a new kind of weight in his chest, not the usual burden of bills and responsibilities, but a softer weight. The kind that came from knowing someone out there had noticed his kindness. The girl's visit with the cookies lingered in his mind. It had been years since anyone had shown him such a simple, genuine gesture. He'd eaten one of them that night, sitting at his small kitchen table, and for a moment it felt like he was part of a family again. He told himself not to get too attached. People came and went. Life didn't usually hand him surprises, at least not the good kind. But then, one morning, the phone rang again. It was her mother. Her voice was calm, but direct. "I was wondering if you had time to talk. In person." He frowned, confused. "Sure about the car?" "No," she said firmly. "About you." Later that afternoon, her black car pulled into the shop. When she stepped out, she looked as polished as ever, dressed neatly in a way that made her stand out from the grease and tools scattered around. She greeted him with a nod, then stepped inside. "I'll get straight to the point," she began. "You helped my daughter that night when no one else would. You've spoken to her with kindness and respect when she needed it most. I don't take that lightly." He held up a hand, shaking his head. "Ma'am, really you don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone decent would do." She gave him a sharp but knowing look. "You keep saying that. But the truth is, not everyone is decent. Not everyone would stop. And fewer still would treat her with the patience he showed." He stayed quiet, unsure where she was going with this. She continued, her tone softening. "I built my life working hard. I have more than enough money, more than enough comfort. But what you did, you can't buy that. That's why I called you. I wanted to see if there's something I can do for you in return." He chuckled lightly, almost bitterly. "I don't think you understand. People like me, we don't expect anything. I'm fine with what I have." "Are you?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his hands, rough, worn, scarred from years of labor. He thought about his empty kitchen, his quiet house, the photo of his daughter gathering dust on the shelf. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe he was fine. But the truth sat heavy in his chest. Seeing his silence, the woman went on. "My daughter told me you spoke about your own child. She said you missed her. That struck me. I know what it's like to want more for your kids, to feel like you can't give enough no matter how hard you try." He cleared his throat, his voice low. I just want her to be safe. To know I love her. That's all." The woman nodded. "And that's what makes you different. You put people first, even when you don't have much yourself. That's rare." For a moment, the shop was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. He waited, uncertain. Finally, she reached into her bag and placed a folded envelope on the counter. "This is not charity. Think of it as an investment in someone I respect. Take it. Use it for your daughter or your shop or whatever you need most." His eyes widened, and he pushed it back immediately. "No, I can't. I don't take handouts." She smiled faintly, not offended. "I thought you'd say that. But listen carefully. This isn't about money. This is about showing my daughter what gratitude looks like. If you refuse, what lesson will that teach her? That kindness doesn't come full circle? That people should close their doors when others open theirs." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at the envelope again. He didn't want to take it. Pride held him back. But another part of him, the part that thought of his daughter, of school supplies he could barely afford, of the nights he skipped meals to save money, whispered that maybe this wasn't about him. Maybe it was about something bigger. Slowly, reluctantly, he picked it up. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you," she replied gently. "Not to me. To yourself. For being the kind of man who deserves it." He nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you." She gave him a small smile and turned to leave. But before stepping out, she paused and looked back. "You may not realize it yet, but crossing paths with you has reminded my daughter, and me, that good people still exist. Don't forget that." When the door closed behind her, he stood there for a long time, staring at the envelope in his hand. His chest felt heavy, but also lighter, somehow. For years, he had given and given, expecting nothing in return. And now, for the first time, someone had seen him, really seen him, and decided he was worth giving back to. That night, at home, he placed the envelope on the table, but didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat quietly, holding the old photo of his daughter in one hand. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe things could change. Maybe kindness had a way of circling back, even when you least expected it. He didn't know yet how far this connection would reach. But deep down, he felt it. This was more than a passing encounter. This was the start of something that could reshape his life. That night, he barely slept. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like a quiet presence, reminding him of everything that had happened in the last week. He kept staring at it, wondering what was inside. Money, he assumed. Maybe a check. But it wasn't really about the amount. It was about what it meant. Someone had seen his worth. Someone had told him, without words, that his kindness mattered. By morning, he finally opened it. Inside was a simple note, handwritten, along with a folded check. The note read, "For your daughter, for yourself, for the life you've given others without asking for anything in return. Thank you." He swallowed hard as his eyes landed on the check. It was more than he made in several months at the shop. Enough to cover the bills piling on his counter, enough to fix things in the garage that he'd been putting off, enough to make a real difference. For a long moment, he just sat there, holding the note in one hand and the check in the other. He thought about pride, about survival, about all the times he had gone without so his daughter could have what she needed. And for once, instead of pushing the help away, he let himself feel grateful. Later that day, while fixing a truck in the shop, he heard the familiar sound of the girl's car pulling into the driveway again. She stepped out, smiling shyly, as usual. But this time she looked more confident. "Hi," she said warmly. "My mom told me she gave you something." He nodded slowly. "She did. And I didn't want to take it at first. But I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about showing gratitude. She told me that." The girl's face brightened. "I'm glad you kept it. You deserve it. You really do." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Deserve is a big word, but I'll do my best to live up to it." There was a short silence before she asked, "Do you think your daughter will be proud of you?" His chest tightened at the question. He looked her in the eyes and said softly, "I hope so. That's all I've ever wanted, for her to know I tried." The girl smiled gently. "She will. I know she will." Her words struck something deep inside him. In that moment, he realized that helping her hadn't just been about a flat tire. It had been about a connection, about the reminder that his efforts as a father, even when unseen, mattered. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. The girl and her mother visited now and then, sometimes for car checkups, sometimes just to say hello. The shop didn't feel as lonely anymore. He found himself smiling more, even laughing at little things. One Saturday morning, he used part of the money from the check to drive out and visit his daughter. He brought her a small gift, something she had wanted for months, but he could never afford before. The look on her face when she saw it made his heart swell. For once, he didn't feel like he was failing her. For once, he felt like he was giving her the world, even if it was just a small piece of it. As he hugged her tightly that day, he thought back to the night on the road. A flat tire, a crying teenager, a choice to stop. That was all it had taken to change everything. When he returned to the shop later that evening, he sat on the porch steps with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft colors, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He thought about the girl, about her mother, about his own daughter. He thought about how life has a way of weaving people's paths together in unexpected ways. One small act of kindness had created a chain reaction he never could have imagined. That night, as he closed the door and turned off the lights, he whispered softly to himself, "Kindness always comes back." And in his heart, he knew it was true.